The bustling space station, a monolithic hub of galactic activity, hummed with the energy of countless species. Brightly lit corridors stretched endlessly, echoing with the chatter of aliens and the subtle whir of advanced machinery. Amidst the sleek, state-of-the-art vessels docked along the station's bays, a single ship stood out, a clunky, outdated human freighter. Its rusted hull bore the scars of countless skirmishes, a relic among modern marvels. The moment it docked, snickers and derisive comments filled the comms channels, alien voices united in mocking disbelief. "What is that scrap heap doing here?" sneered a Klaxian pilot, his voice dripping with condescension. "Did they lose their way to the junkyard?" But inside the human ship, Captain Elena Drake remained unruffled. Her sharp eyes scanned the bustling docking bay through the bridge's viewport, her expression calm, almost indifferent. She had faced this kind of ridicule before, but today, there was no room for pride, only the mission. "Commander Rel," she called, her voice steady, "prepare the crew for disembarkation. We have a council meeting to attend." Rel, a broad-shouldered man with the disciplined air of a soldier, nodded. "Aye, Captain. They'll be ready in 5. He paused, then added, "Do you think they'll even listen?" Drake allowed herself a small smile. "They'll have no choice. We have what they need, even if they don't know it yet." The airlock hissed open, and Drake stepped out onto the platform, her boots clanking against the polished metal floor. The surrounding aliens, draped in elaborate uniforms and shimmering armors, regarded her with thinly veiled disdain. Whispers trailed her steps, their contempt almost palpable. But Drake wasn't here to win a popularity contest. The Galactic Council had convened in response to a threat unlike any the galaxy had faced, a biomechanical fleet known as the Zerthos. Reports of their devastating advances had reached every corner of the known universe, and now, the Council had gathered to strategize. Or, more likely, to argue themselves into inaction. Drake strode into the Council chamber, its vaulted ceilings and gleaming walls a testament to alien craftsmanship. Representatives from dozens of species were already seated, their expressions varying from anxious to indifferent. At the head of the table, General Tareke, a towering figure clad in obsidian armor, narrowed his eyes as he spotted Drake. "Captain Drake," he rumbled, his voice carrying the weight of authority and skepticism. "This is a council of war, not a history lesson. What could your vessel possibly contribute?" Drake met his gaze evenly, unfazed by his thinly veiled insult. "General, my ship may not look like much, but it has one thing the Zerthos don't expect: unpredictability. I propose a strategy that uses our supposed weakness as our greatest strength." The chamber fell silent, the representatives exchanging wary glances. Tareke's eyes narrowed further, skepticism etched into every line of his face. "And what makes you believe your outdated technology can outmaneuver the most advanced fleet the galaxy has ever seen?" Drake took a breath, her voice firm. "Because they won't see us as a threat. And that's exactly what we need to exploit. With the Council's approval, I can demonstrate a tactic that might just give us the edge we need." For a moment, the silence was deafening. Then, a ripple of murmurs spread through the room, the idea as audacious as it was intriguing. Tareke's gaze remained locked on Drake, calculating, assessing. "Very well, Captain," he said finally, a grudging respect lacing his tone. "You have one chance to prove your worth. Fail, and it will be on your head." Drake nodded, her mind already racing through the plans she'd meticulously crafted. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the moment to prove that humanity, despite all its perceived weaknesses, still had a place among the stars. As she turned to leave, the weight of the challenge settled on her shoulders, but it was a burden she had long grown accustomed to. The real test was yet to come, but Captain Elena Drake was ready. And soon, the galaxy would understand that underestimating humanity was a mistake they could not afford to make. The council chamber buzzed with a mixture of skepticism and anticipation as Captain Elena Drake stood at the helm of her aging ship, the Resolute. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the weight of expectation pressing down on her like a physical force. Every eye in the chamber was fixed on the holographic display that now filled the center of the room, projecting a detailed simulation of the Zerthos fleet, a fearsome array of biomechanical vessels, each bristling with lethal technology. Drake's voice, steady and authoritative, cut through the murmurs. The Zerthos are formidable, but they are not invincible. Their strength lies in their predictability, rigid protocols, unyielding strategies. They will not anticipate a strategy that defies their logic. General Tareke, his imposing figure cloaked in shadow at the far end of the table, leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. And you believe that your ship, which is little more than a relic, can succeed where more advanced fleets have failed? Drake met his gaze, unflinching. Not just believe, General. I know it. She activated a sequence on the ship's console, and the holographic display shifted, showing a detailed map of the upcoming battle zone, a dense nebula, thick with magnetic storms and gravitational anomalies. The perfect environment for an ambush. We will lure the Zerthos into this sector, Drake explained, pointing to a particularly chaotic region of the nebula. Their sensors, advanced as they are, will struggle to maintain accuracy within these conditions. Meanwhile, the Resolute's older systems, what you call primitive, will allow us to navigate the storm with far greater agility. Tareke's expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of interest in his eyes. And what makes you so certain the Zerthos will take the bait? A hint of a smile touched Drake's lips. Because they see us as nothing more than a minor nuisance, an insignificant obstacle. They'll assume we're fleeing, retreating into the nebula to hide. It's in their nature to pursue and destroy what they deem inferior. The tension in the room mounted as the council members considered her plan. Commander Rel, standing beside Drake, spoke up, his voice steady. We'll exploit their arrogance, draw them in, and then strike where they least expect it. The Resolute's unconventional weapons systems are designed for this kind of guerrilla warfare. Drake nodded in agreement. Exactly. While they're focused on their usual tactics, we'll be hitting them from blind spots, using the nebula's interference to our advantage. It's a high-risk maneuver, but it's our best shot. For a moment, the chamber was silent, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Then, Tareke rose to his full height, his expression grim but resolute. You have convinced me, Captain. But understand this, failure is not an option. The fate of the galaxy may well rest on this gambit. Drake's gaze remained steady. I understand, General. We're prepared to do whatever it takes. The council members began to file out, their discussions hushed but intense. As the chamber emptied, Drake turned to Rel, who was already reviewing the tactical data on his handheld device. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, Rel remarked, his tone a mixture of determination and concern. The crew knows what's at stake, but this will push everyone to their limits. Drake nodded, the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. I trust the crew, Rel. They've been through worse, and they've always come through. We'll do it again. She walked over to the viewport, gazing out at the vast expanse of space, now dotted with the ships of the Allied fleet. Each one represented a species, a culture, a world that could be wiped out if they failed. The enormity of their mission settled in her chest, a cold, unyielding pressure. But Drake was no stranger to pressure. She had faced impossible odds before and had come out stronger each time. This was just another challenge, albeit on a far grander scale. And this time, the stakes were higher than ever. As she turned back to her station, she allowed herself one final thought before the battle preparations consumed her completely. Underestimate humanity all you want. We'll show you what it means to be resilient. With that, she immersed herself in the intricate details of the plan, her mind already calculating every possible outcome, every potential pitfall. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but Captain Elena Drake had never been more ready. The Resolute slipped into the nebula's turbulent depths, its engines humming quietly as the ship wove through the dense clouds of ionized gas. Outside, the viewports were awash with a swirling kaleidoscope of colors, deep purples, electric blues, and fiery reds, illuminated by the occasional crackle of lightning arcing between clouds. The magnetic storms raged around them, each burst of energy sending ripples through the ship's shields. On the bridge, Captain Elena Drake stood at the helm, her gaze fixed on the forward display. The tension in the room was palpable, every crew member focused on their tasks with an intensity born of necessity. There was no margin for error. A single miscalculation could mean disaster. "Status report," Drake called out, her voice cutting through the low hum of machinery. Commander Rel, seated at the tactical station, didn't look up as he responded. "Shields holding at 80%. The nebula's interference is stronger than we anticipated, but we're still within operational parameters." Drake nodded, her mind already racing through the next steps. "And the Zerthos?" "Right on our tail," Rel replied, a hint of grim satisfaction in his voice. "They're following the decoy we deployed, just as we planned. They'll enter the nebula in less than 5 minutes. Drake allowed herself a moment of relief. So far, everything was going according to plan. But the hardest part was yet to come. "Keep the decoy active as long as possible," she ordered. "We need to draw them in deep before we make our move." As Rel relayed her instructions, Drake turned to Lieutenant Jia Rao, the ship's communications officer. "Any sign that they've detected our real position?" Rao shook her head, her fingers dancing over the console. "Negative, Captain. The Zerthos are fully focused on the decoy. They're broadcasting intercept orders, completely oblivious to our true location." A flicker of a smile crossed Drake's face. The Zerthos, for all their technological superiority, were predictable to a fault. They had underestimated the humans' capacity for deception, a mistake that would cost them dearly. "Good," Drake said, her voice steely. "Prepare for Phase 2. Rel, bring the weapons systems online. I want targeting solutions ready as soon as the Zerthos are in range." Rel's hands moved with practiced precision, activating the ship's unconventional arsenal. Unlike most vessels in the fleet, the Resolute was equipped with a mix of advanced and outdated weaponry, missiles retrofitted with disruptive EMPs, kinetic railguns modified for short-range combat, and plasma cannons optimized for rapid-fire bursts. It was a patchwork of technology from different eras, cobbled together through necessity, but in Drake's hands, it was a deadly instrument of war. As the ship's systems came to life, Drake felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. This was where she thrived, in the thick of battle, where every decision could mean the difference between victory and annihilation. She had spent years honing her instincts, learning to trust her gut even in the most chaotic situations. And right now, every instinct told her that they had the upper hand. "Captain, the Zerthos are entering the nebula," Rel reported, his voice taut with anticipation. "We're picking up multiple signatures. Looks like their main assault force." Drake's eyes narrowed as she studied the tactical display. The Zerthos fleet, a swarm of sleek, deadly ships, was advancing in a tight formation, their sensors sweeping the nebula for any sign of their quarry. They were fast, efficient, and utterly lethal, but they were also overconfident. "They're falling right into our trap," Drake murmured, her mind already calculating the optimal moment to strike. "Rel, stand by for full weapons deployment. We hit them hard and fast, before they have a chance to regroup." "Aye, Captain," Rel replied, his hands hovering over the controls. The tension on the bridge ratcheted up another notch as the seconds ticked by. The crew was silent, every eye fixed on the displays, every muscle tensed in anticipation. Outside, the nebula crackled with energy, the storm's fury mirrored in the hearts of those aboard the Resolute. "Steady." Drake's voice was calm, but the underlying urgency was unmistakable. The Zerthos were almost within range, their sleek forms cutting through the nebula's swirling mists like sharks through water. "Now!" she ordered, and the ship erupted into action. Rel's hands slammed down on the controls, unleashing a torrent of firepower. Missiles streaked from the launch bays, their engines flaring as they homed in on the Zerthos ships. The railguns fired in rapid succession, kinetic slugs hurtling through the void with devastating speed. Plasma bursts lit up the darkness, turning the nebula's gases into a swirling inferno. The Zerthos fleet was caught off guard. Their formation faltered as the unexpected assault tore through their ranks, ships spiraling out of control as they were hammered by the Resolute's barrage. For a moment, the battlefield was chaos, a cacophony of explosions, the shriek of tearing metal, and the blinding flare of energy weapons. But the Zerthos were nothing if not disciplined. Even as their ships took heavy damage, they regrouped with terrifying efficiency, their remaining vessels closing in on the Resolute with ruthless precision. "Brace for impact!" Drake shouted as the first of the Zerthos' beams struck their shields, the ship shuddering violently under the assault. "Return fire, focus on their lead ship. We take it out, and the rest will scatter." Rel complied, directing the ship's remaining firepower at the Zerthos' command vessel. The enemy ship, larger and more heavily armored than the others, absorbed the hits with grim determination, its shields flaring but holding steady. "They're not backing down," Rel muttered, his voice grim. Drake gritted her teeth, her mind racing. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and the Resolute was taking a beating. But retreat was not an option. Not now. "Push them harder!" she barked, her voice filled with resolve. "We break them here, or we die trying." The ship rocked again as another blast struck their shields, but Drake held firm, her focus unwavering. The Zerthos might have the advantage in numbers and technology, but they lacked the one thing that had kept humanity alive through countless trials: determination. And in that moment, as the battle raged around her, Captain Elena Drake knew one thing for certain: they would not go down without a fight. The Resolute buckled under the relentless assault, its hull groaning as the shields flickered dangerously low. Alarms blared throughout the ship, casting an eerie red glow over the bridge. Captain Elena Drake wiped a trickle of blood from her forehead, her hands steady on the controls despite the chaos surrounding her. "Shields at 25% and falling, Captain!" Rel shouted, his voice strained. The ship shuddered violently as another barrage struck, sending sparks flying from overloaded consoles. "Keep firing!" Drake commanded, her voice cutting through the noise. "Target their engines. We need to cripple that command ship, or we're finished." Lieutenant Rao's hands flew over her console, her face set in grim determination. "Firing solutions locked, Captain. Launching missiles now." Outside, the Resolute retaliated with a volley of missiles, each one streaking toward the Zerthos command vessel with lethal intent. The enemy ship, a hulking behemoth of sleek metal and glowing energy, absorbed the impacts, its shields flaring bright white before collapsing under the pressure. "We've breached their shields!" Rel called out, a note of triumph in his voice. Drake's heart pounded in her chest. This was the moment of truth. "Rel, hit them with everything we've got, no holding back." The Resolute's remaining weapon systems roared to life, spewing plasma bursts and kinetic slugs at the exposed Zerthos ship. The command vessel lurched as the barrage tore into its hull, sending debris spiraling into the void. But even as the enemy ship crumbled under the assault, the Zerthos continued their advance, a relentless tide of destruction. "Captain, we're not going to last much longer," Rao warned, her voice tinged with fear. "The forward shields are about to fail." Drake's mind raced, calculating their dwindling options. They were outmatched, outnumbered, and the Resolute was barely holding together. But surrender was not in her nature. She refused to let the Zerthos walk away with a victory. Not after everything they'd fought for. "We can't outrun them, and we can't outgun them," Drake said, her voice steady. "But we can still outthink them." She turned to Rel, her eyes blazing with resolve. "Redirect all remaining power to the forward rail guns. We're going to punch a hole straight through that command ship." Rel hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded sharply. "Aye, Captain." He began rerouting power, dimming the lights and shutting down non-essential systems to feed the railguns. Drake tapped into the ship's internal comms, her voice echoing through the corridors. "All hands brace for impact. This is going to be rough." The Resolute surged forward, engines straining as the ship picked up speed. On the forward display, the Zerthos command vessel loomed larger with each passing second, its damaged hull sparking and venting atmosphere. "Target acquired," Rel reported, his voice tight with anticipation. "Fire!" Drake ordered. The forward railguns discharged with a deafening roar, sending twin slugs hurtling toward the enemy ship. The impact was cataclysmic. The slugs tore through the command vessel's weakened hull, igniting a series of secondary explosions that ripped the ship apart from the inside. The shockwave hit the Resolute like a sledgehammer, slamming the ship back and sending crew members tumbling to the deck. The bridge lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. For a moment, all was silent except for the distant sounds of fires crackling and metal groaning. Drake pushed herself up, her body aching from the impact. The emergency lights flickered on, casting the bridge in a dim, ghostly glow. "Status report," she rasped, her voice hoarse. Rel coughed, wiping soot from his face. "The Zerthos command ship is gone, Captain. Completely obliterated." A faint cheer rose from the bridge crew, but it was short-lived. Rao was still at her station, her eyes wide with horror. "Captain, the remaining Zerthos ships are regrouping. They're still coming for us." Drake's heart sank. Even without their command ship, the Zerthos were relentless. And now the Resolute was barely functional, its weapons spent, and its shields on the brink of collapse. But there was one last card to play. "Rel," Drake said quietly, "prepare the self-destruct sequence." The words hung in the air like a death knell. The crew froze, shock and fear etched on their faces. "Captain, you can't be serious," Rel began, but Drake cut him off. "I am. We've got to take them down with us. It's the only way to make sure they don't reach Earth." Rel stared at her, his expression a mix of disbelief and admiration. Then he nodded. "Understood, Captain?" Drake took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. She keyed in the command codes, her fingers trembling only slightly. "All hands, this is Captain Drake. We're initiating self-destruct. Abandon ship immediately. Repeat, abandon ship." The klaxons blared to life, and the crew scrambled to the escape pods, their faces pale but determined. As the last of her officers filed out, Drake remained at the helm, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. The Zerthos ships were closing in, unaware of the trap they were about to spring. "Rel, get to the pods," Drake ordered. "What about you, Captain?" Rel asked, his voice thick with emotion. Drake gave him a small, sad smile. "Someone's got to stay and make sure this works. Go, Rel." "That's an order." Rel hesitated, then snapped to attention. "Yes, Captain." He turned and ran, leaving Drake alone on the bridge. Drake exhaled slowly, her gaze locked on the advancing enemy ships. She felt no fear, only a deep sense of peace. This was the way it had to be. She reached out and placed her hand on the activation panel, her thoughts drifting to Earth, her home, her people. "For humanity," she whispered, and pressed the button. The Resolute exploded in a blinding flash of light, the shockwave obliterating the remaining Zerthos fleet. In that final, glorious moment, Captain Elena Drake knew they had won.